We don't even know what they listen to.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, we were too busy.
I know. All right, so you guys go ahead and finish your conversation, and hopefully that doesn't happen again.
Oh, no, we all forgot what we were talking about.
Why don't I start at the end and work more backwards, and then we'll maybe find where we left off?
That might be cooler because
All right.
I'd like to find out how this ends. I'm all for reading it.
So, I mean, look, as stoners, there are two kinds of people in the world. There are people who have more cannabinoid activity and those who have less for any particular thing. And remember, endocannabinoids regulate everything. And everybody who gets stoned knows, and everybody who doesn't get stoned knows, because they're making fun of all the people who get stoned, that we have a short-term memory issue. Well, think of what that really means. It means that we're more flexible. It means that we change our minds easier. That's all part of adaptation, which ultimately is what the cannabinoids are doing down at that cellular level when they balance the carbohydrates with the fat burning, okay? CB1 activity, CB2 activity. But now I'm going to go to the end, which is the most mind-blowing thing, and I just realized this. This is like the latest and the greatest, all right? It completely blows my mind. Because I grew up when molecular biology was just becoming a reality. When I grew up, when I say grew up, I mean my scientific education in graduate school. Was when molecular biology was coming into a reality. I remember giving a course as a lecture in a cell biology course as a senior in undergraduate school, where I gave a talk to convince the professor that there was such a thing as message RNA. So, if anybody has any knowledge of biology, they know about message RNA, And back then we didn't. So we unfolded with this basic paradigm, that DNA is the source of everything. And then because we can sequence DNA, we can trace back the DNA sequences and see what changes occurred between the different species and the relationship between simpler and more complex and plants, et cetera, right? But then you get back to the question, how did it all come about? And then we go back to the story that I was telling you of flow. And we go back to, instead of looking at the whirlpool in the bathtub and how we need a way of describing that, and that's what Nobel Prize laureate Ilya Prigogine created a field of physics called far from equilibrium thermodynamics. Far from equilibrium means there's potential, and thermodynamics means flowing energy. And that's what that's what we're talking about here, how cannabis regulates flowing energy in a way that promotes health and longevity. But what actually turns out to be the truth is that we live now in a DNA-centric world. But that DNA-centric world has as its foundation physics that says the life is impossible. And if instead of using that as our foundation, we use flowing energy as our foundation, then it says that DNA came from more complex forms of flowing energy until the level of complexity was great enough that DNA became a solution. And out of this now, things get very, very crazy, because looking at mutations as accidents that occur and randomly have created the changes that natural selection selected on, in a Darwinian sense, survival of the fittest. Well, in this case, if we switch away from, statics, where probabilities say life couldn't happen, and we now go to flowing energy, creating change, what does that mean on the level of DNA? Well, it turns out And it's just very mind-blowing that when we had done some experiments many years ago when I had a laboratory at the University of Colorado where I was chairman of the biology department. And I had an incredible student, Chris Stubbs, who now works for Jen Canna. And he was so organized and competent, and I'm so disorganized and incompetent that it was just wonderful. And he did these experiments where we were looking at DNA repair enzymes, because that's where I came from, studying DNA repair enzymes and damages that are caused by free radicals in DNA. And we had cells, human cells, that were of what's called a monocytic lineage. They became macrophage. And we had two types. We had ones that burned sugar and were sensitive to chemotherapy and to radiation. And we had ones that were burning fat and were resistant to chemotherapy and radiation. So we went, for years, the lab that I had been working in with, a world-renowned basic excision repair expert, Susan Wallace, we had always been getting money from the National Institute of Health based on the paradigm that, you could better, we have to find better ways of killing cancer cells, and one would be to inhibit repair. So what I wanted to look at was whether or not these drug-resistant cells could repair better than the ones that were not resistant, right? Doesn't that make sense? If you can fix the damages better, then those cells will live better. Simple logic, but never tested. Well, Stubbs goes and does the work, and what do you think happens? The exact opposite. All of the drug-resistant cells were not showing the repair enzymes. And it blew our minds because it made no sense. And this was before I understood the whole metabolism with CB1 and CB2, because we were looking at CB1 and CB2 in different cells as well. In any event, we looked by different techniques. We used PCR and we used Western blots, and we did activity analysis, and then we sent them off to two other labs, the cells, so that they just grew it up and started the experiments all over. Very competent people who had worked with me years earlier in Susan's lab, Zafar Hadahet and Wakao. And they did the same experiments and showed the same thing. The drug-resistant cells had no basic excision repair enzymes expressed. It's like, what the fuck is going on here? And for years, I couldn't understand it. We never published it because we didn't understand anything about it. And finally, I understood it all. And it has to do really with fat burning versus sugar burning. Because when cells are burning sugar, they're successfully interacting with their environment. And where I'm going with this, again, I said I would start at the end. The end that I want to go to is that we do not really live in a DNA-centric world. We live in a metabolism-centric world. And the DNA is nothing but the written record of successful metabolism. Metabolism does all the adaptation, and when it adapts, it's adapting because there are imbalances in metabolism that are causing excess free radicals to be produced. So they have to reshuffle the flow patterns. But as they tolerate the extra imbalances, those imbalances focus on the areas of the DNA that are providing survival. So those are the areas that get changed. So let me put that in other words. If the DNA is burning sugar, then it wants to fix its DNA because that says everything is still good enough. But once it gets desperate and has to burn fat, then it says, the DNA that we have is not giving us what we need to survive. So let's start scrambling the DNA and see if we can invent some new genes or new expression patterns that will continue giving us the survival. Does that make sense at all?
That makes perfect sense to me.
Well,
Marcel, that makes sense to me too, actually.
It turns out that there is a form of DNA repair called non-homologous end joining that does very sloppy repair jobs and generates mutations and gene duplications and all the things that are really the foundation of evolution. And it turns out that that gene is expressed when cells are fat burning, whereas all the other ones are turned off. How wild is that, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, you couple that with other things, and you see, that, for example, telomeres, right? Telomeres are at the ends of chromosomes, and when they're long, that typically, is more characteristic of youth and imbalances and things, that we do as we age, and cells can only replicate a certain number of times because they run out of telomeres. And part of the things associated with cancers is that they can, in some cases, they can just continue to extend their telomeres. Well, it turns out that telomeres are only extended when you're fat burning. And it turns out that we naturally select for drug-resistant cancer cells by the treatments that we do. This is really wild. This is mind-blowing. So, because free radicals regulate everything from my perspective in your body, all right, and in every cell. What happens is cells, when they are, there's different phases to what's called cell cycle, all right? You can have a cell sitting there doing nothing, resting, so to speak, and that's what's called G0. So it's not very metabolically active. It's kind of sleeping. But then it gets some signals that tell it it's got to grow and make more cells or become something, one or the other. Either make more kids or do something else, do something with your life. So it could become a nerve or a muscle, etc., or it could divide and eventually maybe become something, or in a worst case scenario, become nothing but a dividing cell, i.e. cancer. Okay. So now let's say we have a cell that is dividing uncontrollably. Well, let's back up. Let's say the cell is now told to divide. Some growth factor turns on a receptor in a particular cell. That turns on the genes for the cell to make energy efficiently with the electron transport system. And as it does that, it makes too many free radicals. So it backs off a little on that nuclear reactor, the electron transport system, and turns on some safer windmills, the aerobic glycolysis and burning glutamine. And it balances those ways of carbohydrate metabolism. And it does that, and the cell then accomplishes, either making a new cell ultimately, but along the way, as it's making a new cell, what happens is, or if it's becoming a specialized cell, it's got to produce things that are characteristic of what it needs, It's a nerve cell, it's got to make itself a nerve cell, or a muscle cell, it's got to make itself a muscle cell. If it's going to divide, it's got to make all the goodies to become two. So in all of those cases, it uses a lot of electron transport flow to synthesize cellular components, and in the process generates more and more free radicals, which ultimately feeds back and says, stop what you're doing because you're killing us. So we have to switch the flow. We need the flow always to maintain organization. We have to reorient it now. So the cell now, in the case of a cell that's dividing, goes from G0, doing nothing, to G1, where it's making all of the things that it needs to divide. But before it can divide, it's got to check out that it didn't mess up its DNA too long. So it has what's called a checkpoint, where the DNA is examined to make sure that it's fixed if there's too many problems. But in general now, because of the way everything's connected to everything else and you have feedback that too many free radicals are being made, What it does is it shuts down the electron transport system, the nuclear reactor, and only uses the windmills. But without the nuclear reactor, you can't blow up. You see, if you're only using safe way of making energy, then you can't blow the cell up. And that's what happens. The cell wants to turn down its damages when it's replicating its DNA, because the DNA is naked at that point. And that's when it's most susceptible to getting damaged. You know, if you have a book, your DNA is the book. And if you have it open to all the pages at one time and you spill coffee, you can screw it all up. If you only had one page open, then you might be able to rescue it, especially if you have two copies, you know? So that's what happens in reality, that when our cells are replicating and they go into S phase to make DNA, they shut down the electron transport system so they cannot undergo apoptosis. So now think of a cancer tumor, and let's say it only had one mutation to begin with. Well, some of those cells are going to be in S phase replicating their DNA, and you come in with chemotherapy, and you're going to kill all the cells except for which ones? The ones that were replicating their DNA. And you might appear to kill them in that they can't replicate because you screwed their DNA up so much. Let's say you're using, nerve gas, nitrogen mustard from World War II, a common, alkylating agent used to screw up the DNA. And suppose the cell can't replicate, but suppose it still has flow, and nutrients come in and nutrients go out, and the enzymes are working. And because it's in the fat-burning mode, it's turned on that enzyme that starts to shuffle the DNA. And it's going to shuffle the DNA of the genes that are giving it survival. And in the worst-case scenario, you take that cancer cell and you create a gene expression pattern where the flow is dependent on the cell replicating. Now you've got a fast-growing cancer that the more you treat it, the more faster it grows. That's what kills you. Created by chemotherapy, naturally. Uh-oh.
Why oh-ohing?
Because what our procedures that $120 billion a year industry is based on procedures that naturally kill people.
I hate chemo. I really do.
Yep.
But I deal with patients all the time, and when they contact me, that's the first question I ask them: are you taking chemo, or are you going to take chemo? And if you say yes, then I know you're going to need at least twice as much cannabis as you would without chemo.
But at least it can help protect them from the chemo.
That's what I mean, and that's why I say twice as much. So half would go to me protecting it. Pardon?
Don't you find a lot of the failures are from the people who had chemo?
Oh, definitely. Because, but I see way more reoccurrence of cancer from chemo than I do from cannabis.
Yeah, because you selected for those sleeper cells that I'm just describing. You see, they could sit there in senescent, where they're scrambling their DNA and living for years until finally they figure it out. And then they fuck you.
Yeah. And they fuck you good, because usually they come back in the form of brain cancer in most cases.
Well, and again, if they're drug resistant, then you need other approaches. So what I've been recommending for people to do is not to just use cannabis, but to use other metabolic manipulators depending on the situation for the specific cancer.
Right.
So most cancers have mutations in these energy flowing pathways. In particular, and there's a whole slew of them, but most cancers wind up being sugar burners to begin with.
Yeah.
95% of them. And that's why cannabis works, because the high doses of cannabis turn on, via the CB2 receptor, turn on fat burning, and the devoted devoted sugar burners can't make that transition without generating too many free radicals, and then they die. And that's how cannabis works, period.
Yep.
So how many pathways need to be shut down? How many variations are there in what needs to be accomplished to, guarantee the kill? So some of the escape pathways that the cells naturally use are the aerobic glycolysis and the glutaminolysis. And it turns out aerobic glycolysis can be shut down with natural nutraceuticals. With glucosamine sulfate, for example, shuts down aerobic glycolysis. And ECGC, which is the active ingredient in tea and green tea in particular, that shuts down the glutaminolysis. So now you're really putting extra pressure along with the cannabis that's shutting down the sugar burning in general, as well as turning on the fat burning. So by doing that combination, you wind up, overly stressing these already stressed cells to facilitate the death. And if people have already had chemo, so you know that they may have, nasty cells sitting there already, people also do the high dose intravenous vitamin C, where they do like 10 days in a row of really high doses, and that generates free radicals in the blood by interacting with the iron. So that again gives the free radical overload.
Right.
But now if you have a fat burning cancer, now you're screwed, because turning on fat burning is not going to kill it. That's how they're already living.
Exactly.
Things get much messier now. But there are things that turn off fat burning as well. Like
such as?
Well, chloroquine, the quinine. Chloroquine is a derivative of quinine.
Right.
Quinine works the same way. And you can buy quinine over the counter. And it seems to be helpful for the gout as well. You can make teas out of it. You can buy the root, grind it up, and make teas. But I don't have enough experience with the cancer, because too many of the people have, once they have had that chemo and have those drug-resistant selected cells manifest themselves, would not have had luck at that point.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of other related ways of manipulating, and that's why these people have to try these things and explore for themselves once they, if they get desperate because they did the wrong thing. I mean, we were at Prague a couple of years ago, actually again this year, where a number of different people who treat cancers with cannabis, troublemakers, Corey Ellen and Janet Sweeney and Ginge Beyer and Owens, in any event, Bojidar, they all agreed that about 80% or so of cancer treatments are successful, and those are usually the people who haven't had chemo, and then most of the failures are the people who've had chemo. Does that agree with your assessment?
Yes. Yep.
Yes, because they develop that, they select for those fat burners with metabolic flexibility. That's why it's also important that people shouldn't see. You can have different kinds of energy flows selected by different cancers. Some are really very dependent on sugar burning and are still using the electron transport system.
And unfortunately, that's what the majority of the public thinks, is that the cancers are all feeding off of sugar, but that's not true. Some cancers are feeding off the fat.
But usually not not without chemo.
Right. Yeah.
You see, the chemo will ultimately select for that. I have a nice video online. Actually, you should go to my website. People should
I've been to your website a lot. But yes, people should go to your website.
It's CANNA-Sapiens, SAPIENS, Canna Sapiens. And on there, I got a thing, Cancer 2020. That is a keynote presentation that describes the whole metabolic phenomena. I also have it within that presentation as well as separately on YouTube, metabolic manipulation, something like that.
Actually, I think that's the video on the main page is the one that Lenny was talking about in part 1, Al. I just say that because
thanks, Marcel.
Show
thanks.
Into 2 pieces, and nobody knows this until they listen. But in part 1, that was the video that was done in 2006, correct?
No. This was recent, within a year or two.
That was from. I think it said 2018, actually.
That's the one on the main page of the site.
It's like a cartoon, and it shows the cell becoming...
That's the one I was watching.
Yeah. It shows how a stem cell develops into a differentiated cell and then can go backwards and again become more stem cell-like cancer, depending on how far back it's gone in its de-differentiation process.
Yeah.
Yeah, what he said.
I was like, enjoying.
What I'm interested in is how you can have movement on one part of your body, but not on the other, but still feel it.
Now, movement with respect to what are we talking about? What's
to my legs because of my
spinal cord injury.
Spinal cord injury. Okay, yeah.
I can move my toes and ankle on my left foot, but I can't move nothing on my right foot, but I can feel my right leg halfway down. In a lot of the sensation and stuff, it came back over time, and it seems weird to me how it'll be 20 years next year since I've been put in this chair, and it seems like every year that goes on, I get more and more sensation or a little more movement.
How much cannabis do you use and what form every day?
Oh, I smoke a lot. Holy. Yeah, I smoke a lot.
Let's explain something. Darcy is the master grower for an LP here in Canada. That's what he does. Canada. Yeah. We're all up here. They're in Nova Scotia. Darcy and Lenny and Marcel are all in Nova Scotia, and they all work at Truro Cannabis in Truro, Nova Scotia.
All right.
Yeah. So when he's around it like minute by minute.
Well, so you smoke an ounce a day?
Pardon?
You smoke an ounce a day?
No, I'd say average between 5 and 7 grams. I'd say.
We need them to listen. Wait, Bob. We need them to work too.
7 grams, might be the equivalent of a gram a day of oil. Do you eat oil as well?
I don't as much as I should.
Yeah, you see, let me explain something. The oil is different than the smoke because your brain is loaded with CB1 receptors, which is great because you want your brain to get all them CB1 receptors turned on so they can make energy efficiently and you can be as high as possible. On the other hand, you want the rest of your body, especially wherever you have any damage, to be able to take advantage of a full load of CB2 stimulation, which is why you need to eat it. So you should. I eat in the morning, and first thing I do in the morning is I eat, maybe 100 milligrams, and then in the afternoon I eat maybe another 100 milligrams, and at night I eat another 100. And at times I've eaten a lot more, at times I've eaten less. And then similarly with CBD oil, consuming that every day. And then I take NAC every day. I take 4 pills, 2 in the morning, 2 at night, for like a gram, over 2 grams a day of NAC. I take the alpha lipoic acid, which also turns on fat burning.
I hear Lenny talking about that a lot.
I take the glucosamine sulfate 2 a day, and just eat vitamin C all day long. You want to knock down free radical production, and you want to eat properly. You want to stay away from carbohydrates. You want to eat fats. If you're I live off dairy, but it's got to be grass-fed fat, because then
I can't
omega-3s.
I can't do the dairy, so that leaves me out of a lot of.
Then fish and fish oil.
See, I like a lot of fish. I do like a lot of fish.
And if you're eating meat,
we're on the East Coast.
it should be grass-fed meat, and eat the fat.
I eat a lot of venison.
I love fat,
like deer meat, and I like eating a lot of deer fat.
Well, we need to consume a lot more fat and protein and a lot less.
I agree with you 100% there, because my uncle is 92 years. My great uncle is 92 years old, and the guy, I've watched him eat 37 years of my life, and I've never seen the guy ever eat a pork chop. He'll always eat the fat and throw the meat to the dog. And I never,
because pork fat rules, man.
But I never understood why.
Because it's awesome. That's the most flavor.
He told
me
that
where those pigs were growing, what they were fed.
And they raise all their own pigs,
and
they feed them all with their own grain.
That's what
they grow they grow all their grain, and they don't put heavy chemicals and fertilizers and pesticides on there.
No, what you got to be doing is feeding them bud, some nice THC bud, and have those pig fat loaded with THC.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
And make them cows milk really juiced up properly.
And I always wondered if you feed them lots of bud, pigs and stuff, does that transfer over into the fat?
Yeah, of course it will. Look, why do you think this test work?
Cannabinoids attached to fats.
Fat.
Pigs are fat. So, and it's the same as you. When you consume cannabis, anything that it's not used is being stored in your fat cells.
Yes, it is. Yes, you're right there, Marcel.
Right. That's why you always fail piss tests.
Stored what's not used, just the nature of the flow. They are fat soluble, so they naturally stay there, and then we make them water soluble by chemically changing them, and that's when you piss it out.
Yeah.
I drink a lot of water, so
that's why you fail drug tests after 30 days.
People have failed after 2 months. This one woman who was in a hospital observed, and 2 months later she still was failed it.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Nazis have to look at our pee-pee.
Yeah.
It's so retarded. What a bunch of morons.
See, this is why I like Bob. We think the same lines. They're a bunch of knobs.
It's true. We naturally select for these uptight assholes who naturally, because of their cannabis deficiency, are afraid of change. So what do? They're going to then run the world, tell us how to behave so that they don't have to suffer any change. We'll let them rob us all the time so they can be comfortable and feel secure that they have enough, but they never are secure because they could never have enough because they don't get high enough because they don't make enough cannabis to begin with, which makes them too stupid to use more.
That's why I said, I've always said the same thing, that cannabis will fix everything except stupidity, unless you can get stupid to try the cannabis.
And unless they have the right, look, if they're receptor deficient, some people have mutations in those receptors,
We come to the conclusion that stupid can't grow cannabis, Marcel.
Well, that's a given too.
Well,
we're seeing that.
Bullenberg will teach you how to put a seed in the ground.
Yeah. But
the asshole in the debate the other day, presidential debate. Farmers, anybody could put a seed in the ground.
Yeah. Well, it takes somebody special to actually make a nice fruit out of that seed.
Sure does.
He's such an asshole, and he's totally anti-cannabis. So he should go.
Of course, but I've heard the same thing that look, any idiot can grow this; it'll grow in a bucket of mud, and it's true. It will grow in a bucket of mud, but you're only going to get out of that plant what you put into it.
I dedicated 20 years of my life to this plant, and I still don't understand it fully.
It is an amazingly plastic variable plant. It's just incredible.
I learned one thing though. It's so tough. Like, you can leave that thing without water for like 2 weeks, and it's wilted, and it looks like it's been dead. And give it a drink, and it just bounces right back. It's so resilient, and it is. And then if you feed your plants properly, you can make them even more resilient and withstand more drought and withstand more pest damage if you had that in your grow or in the environment. But that's why I like cannabis, and that's why I learned from cannabis. That's why I love growing it.
But that's like me. I've been using cannabis for 45 years. For the last 14, I've dedicated nothing but researching on how to make cannabis work as a medicine. And the thing that I can't get over is I'm learning every frigging day. Still, every day I learn new stuff, because now with legalization here in Canada, we're getting more access, again, to research that we were never legally allowed to do before. We had to rely on research coming out of Italy more than anything, or Israel. The research that we did not Italy, Israel, I meant, sorry.
Well, there's tons of research. There's tons of research from around the world. The problem is the things that I've told you, which I think are relatively obvious and easy to understand, are completely rejected by the scientific establishment, who only the CB1 receptor, we find that in our nervous system, and the CB2 receptor, the immune receptor, and blah, blah, blah. Fuck, these people don't get stoned. They don't have a clue about the reality of what this is. And they're the experts who are telling the idiots and the lawmakers how we need to control it because we need more studies. Morons.
I look at the scientific community as being anywhere between 5 to 10 years behind what we're doing in the black market. I saw a study come out, I think it was just the other day or something, about mixing psilocybin, magic mushroom, and cannabis together in capsules.
I know.
We've been doing that for fucking years for people.
Well, how about the whole epilepsy story?
There's another one, yes.
Story. I mean, they fucking published in 1972 about cannabis and cancer, and then it disappeared until 96. This is criminal activity. These people are sick.
But think how much pharmaceutical companies have made over those years.
Yep.
Right? Just think what they made off me in 5 years, Purcell.
I know.
50
That's
pills
what I
a
mean.
day for 5 years.
My doctor and I,
a lot of money.
My doctor and I sat down and we figured it out that if I was able to stay alive and use the drugs for MS, my using cannabis at my own expense was saving taxpayers $150,000 a year.
That's the whole thing. What they should do is give everybody free CBD and THC, and that's healthcare.
Exactly. You wouldn't have long wait times in hospitals. You wouldn't have hospitals closing because they have a shortage of doctors. You'd have doctors sitting around with their thumbs up their ass waiting for somebody to have trauma so they could do something.
Well, we have to teach them how to grow. I think hospitals have to be turned into grow rooms.
I think they should have healing gardens.
Yeah, the whole hospital.
Yeah, cannabis plants growing everywhere. So let the terpenes flow. People would be a hell of a lot calmer in the hospitals.
But they have to learn how to eat. Everything has to be organic, and you've got to learn to stay away from carbohydrates. I've been using cannabis for, I think, 54 years now. 54, something like that, 56 years. And I tell you,
you're older than us.
There's no question it's an anti-aging drug, and that you can reverse things. That's the magic, you see. Once you get into the metabolic-centric world instead of the DNA-centric world, then you become empowered for your own life. And fairly recently, I've now become quite convinced that I have remodeled my heart, where I could always feel the tendency to want to fibrillate. And the one pharmaceutical that I've stayed on was this one potassium blocker that was good for the AFib. And I would still go out regularly, but taking enough CBD stabilized it. And then I got into this whole better understanding of flow and how to apply my concepts to exercise, because I do I go to the gym very regularly. And over the past, I'd say, month or 2 months, I've had now a significant change in my heart, because I can monitor that with this app that I have. And I now know for sure that something healthy has happened, which is wonderful.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there about CBD in your heart, because I was eating like a 1 gram syringe of CBD pretty much every night before I was going to bed there for a while. And I was at the hospital one day getting my bladder checked, actually, because I was having bladder problems. Just so you know, Bob, I have a history of kidney stones.
Mm-hmm.
But in the last 5 years, I've been 100% clean. Everything's been awesome.
Everything's been stone free.
Well, everything's been awesome. I mean, even my urine's been clean. I haven't had a bladder infection in 5 years. So, I mean, knock on wood, because I don't want to jinx myself. But
yeah,
that's pretty good for someone that's in a wheelchair, right? Because you're prone to it, because I catheterize, right? So
he's opening himself up several times a day to a UTI.
Usually,
literally.
Usually 5 to 7. I usually pee 5 to 7 times a day.
Yeah.
I had one of those Foley catheters for a while when I had hemorrhoid surgery. And before I knew that all I needed to do was stick some butt up my butt.
Yeah. Suppositories work wonders, man. I saved. I saved. I shouldn't say that saved, because I can't say that word. But there's a lot of people here that are still here because they use suppositories.
Yep. I learned the hard way that.
Yep.
This was years ago, before we knew what we know now. You know.
It's unreal how many suppositories I make a month.
Well, not just that, the multi-uses they have for them, because I accidentally stumbled across them one night when my significant other had an issue, and I said, hey, try a suppository and see whatever works. And she was nervous at first, but she tried it, and 6 hours later, her problem was cleared up, and she didn't have to worry about it anymore. And she was kind of shocked. So the next morning she took another one just to be on the safe side, and the next day it was completely gone. But yet, pharmaceutical land, you have to do that for what, 7 to 14 days, Marcel?
Yeah.
Yeah. See, so that's a big difference with just 2 little cannabis suppositories.
Yeah.
One, actually, because I've had other women do the same thing, and not to embarrass anybody, but what he's talking about is very common, but that's yeast infections.
Yeah.
And a single-use suppository yeast infection will usually clear it up. I say within 24 hours. I don't time it because I don't have that issue. But everybody else that I've had says one suppository once and it's gone. So take that, Monistat. Here's my new slogan for suppositories.
Take that, Monistat.
Take that, Monistat. Yeah.
But it just goes to show that how this plant and this world in general, and human and animals and everything on the planet, how it all connects to this one plant, and it's fascinating.
Endocannabinoid system, energy flow. That's what it is.
Yeah. Oh, it like I said, it's so interesting. And the last little bit of.
Now I'm going to just slightly change the subject, because now I want to know Bob's take on a few different things. How do you feel about THC isolate or CBD isolate?
Well, in general, I like full extracts. I don't like isolates. Because the plant has there's a whole bunch of goodies that go into the making and the breaking and the crosstalk between all of those makers and breakers that's lacking in the pure isolate.
So here's my problem is I'm a firm believer that we need a whole plant extract, because if we have an endocannabinoid deficiency, we don't know which endocannabinoid we may be deficient in. It only makes sense to add all of the cannabinoids, the widest range.
Well, ultimately,
but in our legal world, our problem is we have people looking for isolates because they think that's what they want because they're getting the cleanest version, but all they're getting is THC or CBD or even combining THC, CBD, but they're missing out CBG, CBN, CBC, right?
And all the other ones that we don't know about.
But you know what, though? I would rather see all of those isolates added to food so that people started to consume more, because I'm firmly of the belief of what I've said, that this flowing energy drives change. And right now, we are being exposed to poison food, air, water, and radiation, and then 5G. So we're constantly in need of more and more free radical protection, which means we all need more and more cannabinoids and polyunsaturated fatty acids, and that will drive really the evolution of humanity, so that Canasapiens will emerge as we squeeze the truth out of as critical levels of cannabis are in human population. So you don't look at humanity as a collection of individuals. Look at it as one biochemical distribution in the chemical reaction called the planet Earth. And that the isolation of the individual is still really part of that flowing biochemistry of human biochemistry. And it's only when that level of human biochemistry has sufficient cannabinoid activity that we will evolve to the higher level of genetically encoded cannabinoid activity, as that becomes the solution for overcoming the stress and the stupidity of the backward-looking cannabis-deficient people who run the world.
Hey, Marcel?
Yes, sir.
For sure.
Do you think aliens are sitting out there saying, you stupid fucks, I gave you, the cure was under your nose all along?
Pretty much, yeah.
Like I gave you the key, the lock and the key, and some of you figured it out, and the rest of you are just blind to it.
I wrote a paper years ago, and that's basically what it was called, was the alien plant. That the plant on this planet had to have been placed here. To be, if you look at it, it's a complete factory of everything that human life needs. You can build your building material out of it. You can build your medicine out of it. You can build your food out of it. It's a fully sufficient plant that an entire planet could survive off of that plant. I mean, yeah, they would need more proteins and things like that. Just grow more seed. So, yeah, it's always been an alien plant to me.
No,
Bob's now thinking about the little glass jar sitting on the alien kid's wall as his class project.
Well, what I've come to appreciate is that there is something unique and different about humans, and since evolution continuously selects for hypervariability in terms of our ability to adapt, and that's what cannabis does in our brain, gives us the ability to constantly take in new by not clogging us up with too much of the old, which is why we forget better, which is good. And so that's one piece of information, and then you look at, the religious histories and all of the stories of the aliens and what's going on there, what may have gone on there. And then you look for sure, there are spaceships and things that are very outside of our accepted realm. I have those pieces of information. And then I have a brilliant friend, Brad Sorensen, who worked at Area 51 for 16 years. And he's the smartest person on the planet. He blows my mind how brilliant he is. And he says that we are, that we've been engineered, humans, and that's how why we have this disconnect with what came before us. So who the fuck knows?
Yeah.
It definitely piques my interest, that's for sure.
That's why I like it. Cannabis is I can always continue to learn, and I can always figure out cool shit with it. And if I can figure out cool shit with it to make people's lives better, or improve quality life, or even extend life, then I'm all for it.
Well, there's no question it does. I mean, if you've ever seen, I forget her name all the time, the Indian lady who died at 123, how'd you live so long smoking ganja every day?
Yeah. I'm one of those that's living proof. I'm only alive because of cannabis.
Me too, Marcel.
I can fully admit that, and I have a doctor that will testify to it.
I would have been dead now too if I didn't learn what I learned and change my diet.
Yeah.
If I stayed on pharmaceuticals, I'd definitely be dead.
Oh yeah. When I get off the pharmaceuticals, I could get out of the wheelchair.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I look pretty retarded walking, but.
Do you use topicals? Topicals are amazing.
I make topicals.
Marcel makes amazing topicals.
You bathe yourself in them?
Actually, I have once a week. My loving spouse gives me a complete rub down, so I have a really tingling evening of sleep, and I'm rested up, and I'm raring to go for an entire week of work.
I put so much on my feet and my legs, where
I put mine on my feet at the evening, but
yep.
That's a given. I mean, with MS, you get sore feet if you're ever standing at all.
You have to try the NAC and the alpha lipoic acid and the glucose.
I do the alpha lipoic acid, and I've tried LDN and a few things like that, but I found that the cream that I use at evening is an amazing cream for my feet. Pardon me?
All of these things need to be used.
Yeah. But, Darcy's an example, or can at least attest. Do I slow down during the week, Darcy?
No.
The energy that I have on Monday morning is the same energy I have on Friday afternoon when I leave. During the week, I might actually pick up that energy just to get people moving a bit more. But
we got one guy in Serbia who was 90% disabled and on full disability because of that. And once he started using cannabis, he seemed to be really ultra sensitive to the benefits, just smoking small amounts. We got pictures of him now. He jump ropes and runs up and down stairs.
I'm not running up and down anything because I'm at that age where I know that's stupid. Jumping rope, I could probably do it. But I've learned to conserve my energy because with MS comes fatigue. So if I overpush myself, then I can push myself into a relapse. And I haven't because I keep testing my limitations to see how far I can actually go. I know what I can and can't do.
I'm telling you, in addition to, cannabis and CBD.
Oh, yeah. Well, and the vitamin D in my case.
Yeah. Well, I take 30,000 units a day. See,
I'm down to 1,000, but it works perfectly. It keeps me within normal range of what I require for vitamin D. So I just bind it to omega-3s to make it react a little better, be used up a little more efficiently, I guess.
Every herb from Chinese medicine, Sanskrit medicine, Indian medicines, every herb that's used to treat cancers, Alzheimer's, diabetes, every one of them turns on fat burning. The Chinese, what the idiots have done is they had all these wonderful herbs that they selected by truth and experience, and now all they're doing is becoming like pharmaceutical whores.
Oh yeah. I'm not. I can't say I have no use for pharmaceuticals, because there's some pharmaceuticals that are proven beneficial. But I'm going to say that I haven't seen a beneficial pharmaceutical come out in over 20 years.
Well, now they're even saying metformin might be causing some complication.
Metformin, you know how metformin works? It turns on fat burning. You don't need metformin. You can take all of these other things, including high doses of cannabis or CBD, and people wouldn't have diabetes if they didn't turn on so many carbohydrates as to make the free radicals so that the body responds by turning off the transport of the sugar into the cell.
Cool.
Turn on fat burning. People who are overweight lose their weight, unclog their arteries, fix their brains. My brother-in-law, 82 years old, went into a home for Alzheimer's about 3 years ago. And everybody who went in his time frame, they were all in wheelchairs. They're all vegetables. He went in as a vegetable, but he could still walk. Now, 3 years later, we're unlike everyone else. He's dancing, making jokes. And the other day, he grabbed my sister's ass, and when she turned around, he was laughing at her. He's far from conscious properly, but he gets glimpses of what's right. And periodically he cries and gets sad, and he says, I know I'm sick, please help me.
Yeah.
So that's, instead of going downhill, he's gotten better and better over, 2.5 years with fucking Alzheimer's at 82 years old.
Yeah.
You can reverse things. We have to learn how to do it better and quicker.
But here's the big question, and this is the big question: do they really want to help?
No, of course not.
Right?
We help ourselves. We don't need them anymore. That's the whole purpose of what I'm trying to explain to people. You only need them when you have the car accident.
Yeah.
You need them for trauma.
Yeah, trauma.
I mean, I've met Rick Simpson years ago. Him and I chatted, and Rick's attitude has always been, we don't need doctors. And my attitude's always been to Rick is that if you break your arm, don't come to me. Go to a doctor.
Exactly.
Right? Because the doctor's going to set your arm.
Doctor as well.
Pardon me?
When he had his stroke, he went to a doctor as well, I think.
I would hope he did. I mean, if I'm having a stroke, I'm going to a doctor. Actually, that's how I got diagnosed with MS, is I thought I was having a stroke. And I went to the doctor, and I ignored symptoms that for 2 or 3 weeks before that could have, it wouldn't have changed the outcome at all. It still would have been what it was.
Quickly for you.
Pardon me?
It came on quickly for you, the MS?
Very quickly. What happened was...
of any kind prior to that?
None, other than the fact that I quit smoking hash for 10 years. That's the only thing I could relate it to, is that very likely I'd had it up my entire life, but I was keeping the symptoms or keeping the progression at bay. But
were you thin or heavy or thin?
Pardon me?
Heavy or thin?
Oh, I've been both.
Back then, though, when it's...
probably a little lighter than I am now.
Which is heavier? Do you have any fat on your body?
Oh, of course. I had to, but that's recovering. At one point, the MS had started attacking my internal organs, and it closed off my intestines. So I lost 100 pounds in 3 months, which was a drastic change for me and my wardrobe. And as I started figuring out how to get this better, to make the cannabis work better, I ended up being allowed to put the weight back on, get my intestines working, because I had surgery, emergency surgery, because they thought I was full of cancer or the most severe case of colitis they ever saw. When they opened me up, they realized that no, it was just MS and there was nothing they could do. So I had to go home and figure it out myself.
Sure.
Bob, I've had a fun trip through this. And I can still sit back and laugh. I mean, there's a few doctors I'd like to probably punch in the face. Several politicians I'd like to, take out back, but I can sit back and laugh at it now. But I've been to hell. You can't do anything to me that's worse than I've already been through.
Yeah, the damage that's forced on people in need by the people who are supposed to help is just mind-boggling.
Oh, it's what I also found too, though, is I was in a wheelchair for about a year. Is where I was pretty much confined to a bed, either the bed or the wheelchair. And my biggest problem with doctors was talking over my head, because I was in a wheelchair, I must not have been smart enough to comprehend what they were explaining to my spouse. And that pisses me off more than anything. So I fired 7 doctors in the first year, and I reported every one of them to the College of Physicians for either blatantly lying to me or not being competent enough to be practicing medicine. So I was rather brutal and took charge of my own health care, and that's the only reason I can say that I survived this. Well, that and the fact that I've ingested over 250 pounds of cannabis since the onset.
It's amazing what a little cannabis will do for you.
Yeah, and it's amazing what a lot will do for you.
I've got a friend with HIV, and he came down with Kaposi sarcoma when I whipped out some oil, and I said, put this on. And this was before he was using cannabis and had no intention of using it. And he puts it on, and we were actually in the belly of the beast. We were in Congress lobbying for new HIV drugs, which is what this guy obviously had. And I go back to Colorado at the time, and he goes back to New York, and I get a phone call. He goes, "Bob, what the fuck is going on here? I'm holding a Kaposi in my hand. They're not supposed to fall off." So I eventually convinced him that he needed to eat a lot of oil every day to turn on fat burning, because viruses require sugar burning in order to produce, more of the viral particles during their replicative phase, synthetic phase of their cycle. So in any event, he did, and he goes from having a HIV load of millions, and he's completely resistant to all the existing drugs, down to 0, even with a lumbar puncture. But where I'm going with this is he, at one point, was traveling, because he's also a molecular epidemiologist, PhD, and was going to one of the AIDS conferences, but didn't take any medicine with him because he was going through a Muslim country. And is away for 2 weeks, comes back, he's got 17 Kaposi. And they're extremely painful when you put the tar on it. It burns them off. So he took, in one day, this guy is a piece of work. He's got 157 IQ or something. He's like totally out there. He takes, in one day, 50 grams of high-quality oil.
Why the fuck, boys, I bet you he was high.
He was gone a few days, but when he came back down, the Kaposi was gone, and it wasn't as painful as if he was, taking less, because he says it's nothing more painful. He says when he was shot, in Bosnia, and they cauterized him in the field, he said that's what it's like with these Kaposis when they get burned off.
Oh, God. Yeah, well, I guess I'll be eating 50 grams of oil, too.
But that shows you nobody can die from an overdose.
No, definitely not. You'll go to sleep and you'll wake up maybe 3 or 4 days later, but that's the worst thing that's ever going to happen to you. I ate ounce and a half of weed and a cup and a half of chili one night because I thought I was smart. And about 8 hours into it, I was so high, I was white as a ghost. I went in. I couldn't even transfer from my wheelchair to my bed. Literally, my torso was in the bed and my legs were laying underneath the bed, and that's how I laid for like fucking 8 hours. Shivering and shaking.
I've been to the cold. Shivering and shaking thing. I had a 650 grams worth of cookies, maybe more.
But the next day, I felt great.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah,
right.
A little hungover.
Nope. It's overdosing on cannabis. People who don't understand cannabis don't understand that it's intrinsically self-limiting.
I mean, the same as I think psilocybin would be. I honestly don't think you could overdose on that either.
I've tried. You can't. I've tried to overdose on cannabis. You can't. Right? I think all of that stuff they told me when I was a kid were lies.
Oh yeah,
you can get pretty fucking uncomfortable. Once I had eaten a lot of oil, then my dog dropped my oil, and this was very terpene-rich oil, and I spread it all over my legs and feet, and I wound up overheating so intensely much that I had to crawl from one side of the kitchen to the other to try to get to the sink to cool myself off. I couldn't stand up. I eventually crawled into my dirty downstairs bathroom floor that had a tile on it. I managed to take my shirt off and lay on the tile floor to cool down enough. Eventually, I crawled upstairs and got in a bathtub, only cold water running, and I went to sleep in the ice cold bath for about I don't know how long. Eventually, woke up and was good again. I was seriously hypothermic. I was in danger.
I think we lost Al.
No, I'm here. I'm listening.
Okay.
And I'm rolling one of them things.
Oh no, you criminal!
Yeah, what can I say? I'm Canadian, eh? So, Bob,
I'm keeping on two conversations on here and in the chat room. So,
yeah, I mean, like we could keep going for hours and hours and hours, but
with Bob on here,
yes,
that's why I want him to come visit us. He's got to come to Harvest Fest. We should start a big campaign. Dr. Bob Melamede to Harvest Fest.
Bob. Near you.
Pardon me?
What airport is near you?
Halifax.
Halifax.
Yeah.
Wonder where a plane goes to Halifax from here. If I went to
several a day, I think.
Montreal, there's probably Montreal to Halifax, or is it?
No, you got direct.
No, there should be direct.
I tell you what, Bob. If you come up to the border, I'll pick you up, and you can come with us.
Drive down with him. There you go.
By the border here north of Vermont?
Yep.
No, the Canadian border. Yeah, the Canadian border.
Yep.
Yeah, north of you would be in Quebec.
Right. So how far a drive are you from there? I have to look up. Halifax, close to where you are. Huh?
It would only take Bob, about 16 hours to get to us.
Oh, that's a long drive. I ain't doing that. I got a nice camper, but I hate going into Canada. I've been arrested twice for CBD. Fucking assholes.
Don't say that.
The last time I brought CBD up for a MS cancer patient. I had left my house without it. And I said, fuck, I'm going to Canada. And CBD is legal here. Let me bring Michael some stuff. And I went back and I got a whole shitload of capsules. And I had them right there by my counsel in plain sight. And I go through and they arrest me and steal my car, steal my CBD, handcuff me and abuse me physically, hurt me physically, and then put me in a cold room without my jacket. When I said, "Can I have my jacket?" the answer was no. You know why? It had strings and I might hang myself. Motherfucking assholes. It cost me $880 to get my car back. Thankfully, I had a credit card. What if I was poor and didn't have a credit card?
I have no reason or desire to go into the U.S. whatsoever at this point in time. It's just an uncomfortable feeling. It's like
They won't
I'm
let you
making
go
it a point at work that I don't get sent to the States.
They won't let you go if you tell them you're associated with cannabis.
Well, I work for a legal company. I can't go there.
Yeah.
And I'm a very outspoken advocate, especially when it comes to patients' rights for medical cannabis. The last person they want in the U.S. is somebody like me.
Yeah, they wouldn't let my girlfriend visit me because she was arrested for cannabis.
I just saw that on here tonight during the show. A Facebook post that a new directorate out of the U.S. is that if you use cannabis in Canada, you'll lose your Nexus pass.
Yeah, I just saw that. I saw that. Yep.
And that's just so stupid. There's a lot more people in the U.S. that smoke pot than in Canada. We were just smart enough to get it legalized. Right? But their federal government wants to make sure that we get penalized for being smarter than they were. I guess.
Listen, guys, I'm going to run.
Dr. Bob, it was a pleasure having you on. It always is.
The pleasure was all mine.
It's always a pleasure, yeah.
I'll send you a Facebook post soon and let you know about Harvest Fest.
Yeah,
we'll talk more.
All righty, buddy. You guys be well.
Thanks, Bob.
You take care, man.
You've been listening to the 420 radio show. We're live here on Fridays from 7 till 9, and we shall say good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Good night. All right, push this button here, and then that.
What are you doing? Nothing? Why not? Trying to get on this Lifestyle Radio website. Sounds like a cool website. Yeah, it's alright. Oh, wait, I might have it. You might have it.
You're listening to Lifestyle Radio.
The opinions expressed during this show are those of the individual participants and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of their associated organizations or Lifestyle Radio.
The girl of your dreams has got to be in some bar.
Sorry, boys and girls, but this is X-rated. So if you're under 18...
Get out, goddammit!
Get the point? Good.
And now?
Bend over.
Y'all ready for this?
Get it down. Get it down. I can't wait anymore.
I like to watch.
Whatever you desire. I know you like it. Do it.
We do it all night long. Looking for rock, punk, metal and alternative rock? Check out the Coverage Radio Show on 420radio.ca, every other Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. New and retro music, major label and independent music. Only on the Coverage Radio Show.
one way. All I wanna do some weed and a bottle of booze. All I wanna do is smoke, drink, and love my girl to some reggae. It's been a long day, me don't take G connection from California. And when me reach me touchdown, you know it hot like a sun.